Okay, so we are live now. Welcome to the second session of the March meeting. This session will be in English. I would like to remind the audience that they can choose the language. They can have the simultaneous translation in Arabic if they want to, and they can also share questions through the chat box on the right side of the screen. I think it's the right side of the screen. And they can share these questions all through the session that will take 2 hours. As Sheikh Hoor introduced the March meeting this year, I would like to highlight a few things, that this March meeting is an integral part of the 15th edition of the Sharjah Biennial, and it's as it was envisioned by Ikwi Enwezor as a theoretical and physical space for thinking historically in the present, which is the title of the biennial. And of course, big part of this edition of the March meeting is dedicated to reflect on 30 years of the Sharjah Biennial. The March meeting, of course, was launched in 2008 as an annual gathering for international art practitioners and art institutions in the region to encourage regional art professionals to connect, partner, and share ideas and on the sphere of contemporary art. This roundtable will focus on the three editions of the Sharjah Biennial, starting in 2003. And this was a transformational point that defined the biennial for years to come, as well as having a great influence in contemporary art locally and regionally, and I would say in the world. The 6th edition in 2003 marked the moment to move the Sharjah Biennial from its traditional model of nation-state representation into a curated exhibition with an overarching theme. I would like to welcome the speakers in this panel. I will introduce them alphabetically with very short bio that you can also, anybody from the audience can check longer bios online in the section People on the Sharjah Art Foundation website. That is an incredible tool for information. I will also focus in the presentation and the bios on the connection with the Sharjah Art Foundation mainly. So I will start with Sheikh Hoor Al Qasimi. Sheikh Hoor Al Qasimi is the president of Sharjah Art Foundation, and she's also curator. In 2003, Al Qasimi co-curated the Sharjah Biennial 6 and has since served as the president of the Sharjah Biennial and the Sharjah Art Foundation starting 2009. She's also the president of the International Biennial Association, IBA, starting 2017, and the president of the Africa Institute and chair of the board of Sharjah Architecture Triennale. Hoor is also board member of MoMA PS1, and she's a jury member of the Prince Claus Committee for the Prince Claus Prize. She curated many exhibitions in Sharjah Art Foundation, but also other outside, and I would like to mention the 2nd edition of the Lahore Biennial in Pakistan last year in 2020. Jack Persekian, welcome Jack. Jack is the founder and director of Al Ma'mal Foundation of Contemporary Art in Jerusalem. He was also the director and the head curator of the Palestinian Museum from 2012 to 2015. Jack was the head curator of the Sharjah Biennial in 2005, and then the artistic director of the Sharjah Biennial from 2007 till 2011, and of course the Sharjah Art Foundation, director of Sharjah Art Foundation from 2009 to 2011. Next speaker, Peter Lewis. Peter is a senior lecturer for the MA Art and Design course at Leeds University. He curated numerous number of exhibitions, including seconds in Sharjah Art Foundation in 2014, the UE Pavilion Sao Paulo Biennale in 2004, and he was associated curator with the German Pavilion in the 9th Venice Architecture Biennale in 2004 as well. He co-curated the Sharjah Biennial 6 in 2003 together with Sheikh Hoor Al Qasimi. Next speaker, Suha Shoman. Suha is an artist, and she works through different mediums, including paintings and video installation. She is the co-founder and chair of Darat al Funun, the Khalid Shoman Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to promote and support Arab art and artists, and it was founded in 1988. Correct me, Suha, if I'm... And Suha was a participating artist in the, one of the participating artists in the Sharjah Biennial 7 in 2005. And she was a jury member for the Sharjah Biennial in 2015. I would like to introduce myself as well. My name is Tarek Abou El Fetouh. I'm a curator based in Brussels, and I have worked in many regional organizations and curated exhibitions in different parts of the world. I'm very close to Sharjah Biennial and Sharjah Art Foundation. I co-organized the first March meeting in 2008. I was one of the 2 curators in the 9th edition of the Biennial in 2009. I also curated the exhibition The Time is Out of Joint in 2016. Thank you all for accepting the invitation to speak in this panel. You are, each one of you is very close or participated closely to the development of the biennial at different points of time. However, I would like to ask you to tell the history as a participating in acting or doer, as well as an observer as well. And I would like to give a kind of backdrop about this period of time, starting the, I would say the period from the late 90s and the early years of the millennium. It was actually a transformational period in the region that was not limited to one organization or one city, but rather witnessed major steps in contemporary art practices and production that engage with local, regional, and global socio-political conditions. This specific period seen the establishment of many number of regional initiatives and organizations, either small or big, offering opportunities for artists to produce, perform, or exhibit their work. It also witnessed flourishing moments of connections among artists and initiatives and organizations in different sites and localities across the region. I would like here to borrow some words from Okwi that Okwi used in his curatorial statement in meeting point 6 that I was honored to work with him on in 2010, 2012, in which that was titled Locus Agonistis, Practices and Logics of the Civic. These sites of struggle, or locus agonistis, that Okwi described as places where a broad spectrum of activities, practices, positions, institutions, and social forms can be felt as pressure points. These points, at once local and national, global and transnational, civic and ideological, secular and theological, regional and geopolitical, constantly induce fresh demands for diverse practices, logics, and civic techniques. Again, against this backdrop, the Sharjah Biennial took major, I don't want to say steps, but I want to say leaps that we are trying all of us together to shed lights on through this panel. I would like to start the questions with a question to Hoor Al Qasimi that took the responsibility in 2003, and actually discussing with Suha a few days ago, I went back to your statement for the 6th edition of the Sharjah Biennial, and there are 2 points that I would like to highlight. The first point is a kind of declaration when you said moving from participation in terms of national identity to a curated exhibition, which I think is a very courageous kind of step or leap, what I call leap. And then the second part that Suha mentioned to me, art as a means to see differently and a tool to bring change. So I would like to ask you, can you tell us a bit about the circumstances and also your motivation to take the lead for the Sharjah Biennial and to believe that this can happen? Of course, it was an opportunity, but also it was a challenge. So can you tell us a bit about this period of time and how did you start in 2003? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it many times before, but for me, it was really an accident, I would say, because I didn't have in mind that I was going to take over a biennial or I was going to be a curator. You know, I was at art school, but very much grew up with Sharjah Biennial. Growing up and going to art school, Sharjah Biennial was the only biennial I knew. And I was very much interested in seeing what was happening around the world. But it was in 2002 when I visited Okui's Documenta 11 that it came as a complete shock to me because I'd never visited a biennial outside of Sharjah before. And the curatorial premise, the internationalism, the global aspect of what we were all talking about, rather than being segregated into pavilions or national representation, really got me thinking. And I was very inspired by that. And I was wondering why our existing biennial didn't follow that model. If something like this could inspire me, a visitor, visiting the Sharjah visiting Documenta, why can't the Sharjah Biennial have the same power to influence and inspire our local audiences? Another thing was I found the national representation always unequal because it always, most of the time, went through official channels who would send the artists that they would suggest. So year after biennial, you'd have the same artists showing again and again. So for me, I thought it was important to change that. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I was kind of thrown in the deep end, but it was a challenge. But more than anything, it was a determination that something had to change.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Documenta 2002. Of course, it was also something, kind of an event that also influenced me, myself, at that point of time. But I would like here to mention that one of the strong points in Documenta 2002, the edition that Okui curated, was also the proposal or the declaration that the contemporary art function and produce through different centers. It goes now beyond started to go then beyond the historical centers of knowledge building and artistic productions. Did you imagine at that moment that Sharjah can be one of these global centers around the world, or that was not part of the
it wasn't
wish? Was it
I want to say there wasn't really a plan.
Okay.
It was more of the biennial is happening and it's been happening for a while, but it needs to change because the model didn't suit what was happening within our generation. You know, a lot of people don't have access to go and travel to see Documenta or to see other biennials. So for me, I had worked on an exhibition before the biennial in 97, 98, where I met Peter Lewis through an artist friend, and we worked on an exhibition of 21 British artists. So at that time, I was stuck and I didn't know how to move forward, but I knew that I had a group of people who helped me with this first exhibition. So I contacted Peter and said, yes, please help me figure out how I can do this. I was 22 at the time, just out of art school. So I knew what I wanted to happen, but I just felt like I needed solidarity or a group of people. And it very much was an artist biennial. A lot of artists helped and supported, and we mounted the exhibition as artists as well. So it was a changing moment, definitely, but I couldn't have done it without everybody else's support and help.
Yeah. And can you tell us a bit about the steps you took at that moment? Like, what did you do? How did you start to invite Peter, or how did you imagine you can do it? Was it only Peter, or you invited other people from the original organization of the Sharjah Biennial? So if you tell us a bit about the history of how this happened.
Yeah, there was a committee that we were part of. I still invited Peter to help me, and Makiko Nagaya as well, who worked on inviting a lot of Japanese performance artists. And then some artists that I've worked with who were already, we invited, helped us with the more logistical aspects as well. But the original model had an open call for the biennial as well. So we thought it wouldn't be fair to dismiss the open call. We went through all the applications, invited artists from all over the world, from Bangladesh, from Philippines, from South Africa, everywhere. So it was very much an international global biennial. But at the same time, we invited artists as well. And we also commissioned a few works. And it was the first edition to also use the arts area, which was a known area with the art museum. Previous to that, all the biennials were fully in the expo center. And for me, it was a little bit problematic to have a space that was a space for trade, and you have to go through turnstiles to enter, and it wasn't as inviting as the area where the arts area is in. So it was important to really have a presence in what was the arts, or still is called the arts area, where the Emirates Fine Arts Society is based, and the Arts Institute, and the Sharjah Art Museum.
Okay, great. And maybe now we can move to Peter Lewis, and he can tell us a bit about this edition, the 6th edition, that was a very, very important edition. As I mentioned in my introduction, that was a kind of transformational moment.
Well, it was fantastic. It was great to be invited by Hoor, and I had worked with her in '98. I was running Goldsmith's curating course in London, and we both had an experience of the London art scene, of course, which was quite international. It wasn't just it was being London. It was bringing people from all over, and people who were, from the post-war period, emigres and immigrants. Generally, we were a very mixed situation. So coming from that background to a kind of idea of restructuration, there's the structures that were immediately in our face were the National Pavilion, as Hoor quite rightly said, were in the hands of officialdom, etc. So also the team, construction of a new kind of team didn't preclude the systems of the old, which some aspects were rescued. So rescued from, there still pertained interest in call out that brought in lesser known, say some very established names actually, like Orimoto and people, but some other names that you would not have heard for. So this sort of coming together as a meeting place between lesser known artists and using different strategies for the invitations and bringing in other curators like Thomas Berghuis from Guillaume Paris in Paris, who was in China, the Makiko's Japanese selection and the Chinese selection, and the African artists that Hoor brought in. There were some omissions, of course, and problems because we had a very tight schedule. And I do agree, absolutely, it was a completely chance operation. It was using accidentality as a basis for, so that there's some very beautiful chance relationships, and using multiple spaces, and the fact that we'd both visited the Arquiz Documenta. So we had a fantastic affinity with having visited that particular exhibition, and of course it was a remarkable piece of work. So the kind of influences and the very impromptu nature of working in a new environment and a completely new idea As the new idea is always something unknowable. So we didn't really have a plan. As Hoor says, I agree. There wasn't actually a set plan. It was, what can you say, a motivation. I think the better word would be motivation. And there's a term I would use, plasticity, knowing that this biennale could regenerate a new form. It could develop into a new kind of form from all the influences that were being brought upon it, the meeting place, as Lisanne talks about, so that there would be imaginaries brought in from all these different processes. And that's quite a healthy mix, because you have no idea quite how it's going to work. And the real key to this, I think, was bringing the artists in themselves. You know, the artists were actually taking part in the construction, in the reconstruction of the whole Biennale. And that's what really made it an exciting, phenomenal living experience. So it was a kind of a live-in Biennale, you know, it wasn't pre-structured, it wasn't pre-formed, it didn't have a plan. And it was open to all kinds of new possibilities. And that's where we started in October 2002. And we opened in March 2003, and with a fabulous, collection of environmental spaces that we redesigned. Actually, we built 7 cinemas in the Expo Center, for example, and we took out all of the paraphernalia of commerce as much as we could, and reduced, and I call it a process of subtraction, not of addition. So we subtracted to quite a minimal kind of show, very elegant show, because the space was huge. So the elegance allowed for all these different artistic practices to be correlated. They were in the space together, but they had plenty of space. So visitors, the navigation of the space was very important. The Expo Center was transformed, the museum was transformed, and there was a parallel, the Arab Museum, of course. Dorothea van der Keulen curated Chalida's prints, an enormous show. So that the sort of Lebanese artists, you know, coming in, Tony Shaka, Bilal Kebej, and Jalal Tufik. That's an incredibly high contrast with Chalida. And I think those sort of contrasts were operating all the way through. Of course, the underlying kind of generic medium was cinema, of course, cinematic approaches from Africa, from Japan, from Britain, even UK. And USA, there was a completely different kind of selection of artists for the USA, because we didn't invite any sort of major names. And so we had a very wonderful set of other different kinds of practices, things that you just wouldn't encounter normally in the kind of Biennale framework that had been already established by the major Biennale. Yeah, go on.
And then after that, we needed some structure, and that's when I reached out to Jack. So the idea of this artist biennial, that was a little bit difficult to manage in a way, because we were just kind of thrown in the deep end. Yeah. And then I called on to Jack to help me figure out, you know, how to go from there, because I was kind of still completely lost, because it was an experiment. But I realized that this wasn't a one-time thing, and I had to continue this. Yeah. It became my job now.
Luckily.
So that's when I called on to Jack for his help and support with his experience, and who has contributed to the creation of the foundation as well. So it was really putting a structure into place that set off the foundation to where it is today.
Very nice. Before we go to Jack to talk about this structuring moment, I would like maybe to invite Suha to speak, to give us an idea about the regional context at that time. Because Suha, you are the director of the Darat al Funun and the Khalid Shoman Foundation, which was one of the early foundations in the region that was founded in 1988. And of course, you were in contact somehow with all the regional initiatives, or at least heard about them, collaborated with them as the institution was established to promote the artist. So can you tell us a bit about the context, the regional context, where that period?
Allow me, Tarek, before that,
yeah.
My idea is to try to place Sharjah in its local and regional context.
Perfect.
And, listening to Hoor and Peter, it's very exciting, because when I thought we had a panel and you insisted about the role of the artist and how the artist started the whole movement, and I think we've come full circle. And this is what's happening now. Most of the biennales, like Berlin or others, are inviting artists. And when I thought it was a panel where I would speak for 10 minutes or so, I had started like this. I would like you to listen, because, and what Hoor said is very important in terms of even what's happening now. So I started the Sharjah Biennial story is a success story, because I believe it has been led and conceived by an artist's creative mind and perceptive eye. Artists explore, create, innovate, and in the process operate change. They are experimenters, a definition taken after Michel Foucault, who refers to himself as an experimenter, asserting that thinking differently and self-transformation, rather than validating what is already known, is at the core of his philosophical approach. If we listen, this is how I would continue, if we listen to Hoor's words in her introduction and ecology of choice to the Sharjah Biennial 2008, we will soon realize that was a path taken when she announced in 2003 a new era for contemporary art in the Gulf. So please listen to these words because they are really actual as well. This Biennale, she said, will aggravate a common questioning where everyone simultaneously will have the chance to think difference, if not will it, as pondering is located in this void between action and surrender. It trembles in this space where one does not have to act, but also where one takes action to no limit. Let this Biennale be an invitation not to find a solution, but to understand what is at stake, why and how we can create an alternative discourse to an otherwise official stance. The Biennale becomes a space and means of contemplation, reconciliation, and reluctant interventions. It is an attempt to offer a harmonious, disruptive site for an intellectual and creative discourse that is simultaneously receptive to the various components of this age and its pressing issues. These are challenging words that set the tone to the guiding concepts of the new era and the vision of the future. These words are very relevant today. But this is to say that already for the Biennale, Sharjah Biennial 2008, I thought it's incredible to speak of action no limit, to speak of to think difference, to speak what was intriguing for me, reluctant interventions. How could it be interventions and reluctant? To speak of a harmonious and disruptive site. This is, I think, this desire to continuously question and explore is what made the success of the Sharjah Biennale. And I witnessed it personally, okay, first as an artist, then and it's two different experiences. As an artist, I was in with the other artists at the Expo Center, but it was amazing. It became this big commercial industrial place became a bubble for video art and installations and something really quite And as it happened, Okwi was the member of the jury, and it was an amazing experience. At that time, you didn't have the spaces. It was still work in progress, as it should be, and as I believe it should be. This is why, if you allow me, I'll speak to place things in the regional context about 2015, because 2015, the Mauritius places had opened already. And then they were organically designed spaces that represent the identity, the spirit of the city, and the history, and so spaces of contemplation, as you wish them, Hoor. And then it was a great relief to see that, because one, what we see in nowadays in our region, it's everybody competing to build the big spaces, expensive spaces, monumental, majestic places where form prevails over the substance. So when I speak of the spaces particularly, I speak of them fondly, because this is how at Darat al Funun we progressed progressively over this period of 33 years, modeling our site and our spaces with the need of the artist and the audience. And so you ended up having a space, not, as you said, what I like about the discussion as well. It's not that it was planned from the beginning to build. We have 6 houses now restored. An archaeological site of a Byzantine church built over a Roman temple renovated, where we make concerts, and it was not planned. It just happened. It just happened, and it progressed slowly. The first 3 buildings, we did them in the first 3 years, and then it's only 16 years later, when we wanted to, we established our fellowship program. More, we needed space. We continued the rest of the compound. So first of all, and
it was developing or getting bigger according to the needs of the artist and the circumstances as well, right? As a but also it's applicable to Sharjah Art Foundation, right?
Exactly. This is what I mean. This is why the art spaces of Muraija are, for me, I was really very excited, because this is how I conceived. And we could have, had we wanted to be, we could have built a big building from the beginning. No, but we went to the heart of the city with the message that art is not luxury. Art has to be embedded in the city, the way the spaces are. So this was one thing. The other thing, which is very important in terms of regional involvement of Sharjah, for the Biennale 11, Sharjah traveled to Jordan and before, and very few, all of you, very few travel to Jordan. Jordan is not on the map of the curators, and but Josh Hoor came, and then not only she came, she saw the works, and she promoted the works of 2 forgotten artists, Abdel Hay Musallam and Fakhrinissa Zaid. And not only that, she invited them to the Sharjah Biennale. Being in the Sharjah Biennale propelled them to the international scene. So Musallam ended up exhibiting this big exhibition at the new museum, and Fakhrinissa at the Tate Modern. In addition to that, we did programs together, like the big exhibition at Beit al-Sirkal for Amal Kinnawi, and we hosted the Do It exhibition at Darat al Funun. We, of course, we participate in the book art fair, but more so, Hoor is on the advisory board of Darat al Funun, the same that she is on the board of Ashkal Alwan. So this shows the local commitment to be engaged regionally. which was really which is needed. So it's a success story, but after success with a big responsibility. What next? You know, now you know, success I feel weighs more than failure.
But also, it's intriguing that this period, like I remember the first time I met you, it was in 2003. Also, I think I started to in starting 2001 or 2002, I don't remember. Then we started to connect to Beirut, and we started to see exhibitions of Khalil Rabah in Cairo. I worked with Jack in Berlin for this orientation. So it started to, you know, we started to meet each other. I think it's intriguing that at the same moment, the Sharjah Biennial took that leap that I'm mentioning, or the steps. And I think it's interesting to, or at least it's good to mention that it happened at the same time, so we can understand historically the recent history, how this connections.
Exactly. We are in '88 when we started. We needed and as a private foundation. We needed a space for meeting the artists. I knew the artists in my travels. I had started acquiring works for the collection or the bank, like from Marwan or other artists, but the artists did not used to know each other. You had the Intifada, then you had the Lebanese Civil War, then you had the Gulf War, all these problems, and no more wasati like the plans in Iraq, or the exhibition, the first, the Artists Association in Syria, and then so different, and then 79 as well, you had Sadat, the Trump of the Middle East. You know, so it was necessary to have a meeting place. Okay, the issue, the problem for us, we started, and then we worked hard, and Jack knows, and he always used to pass, and he knows the difficulty, the challenging work in a zone conflict, and the problems in all levels of refugees, etc., in Jordan, and building the infrastructure. So I feel that with this attitude, with this concept presented by Hoor already in 2000, it was 2008, speaking of action with no limit, speaking of no surrender, speaking of the discourse and the will to change, all these things, and the exposure it brings, you know, brought another channel for us to work, you know. So it's not only Bilad al-Sham, it spread to an area who is, I think, the most serious in the region there.
So talking about this regional context somehow, and this period of time, I would like then to move to Jacques, that I think he played a major role for building bridges with regional institutions, personalities, and initiatives, starting from his position as a head curator in 2005, and then the artistic director of Sharjah Biennial from 2007 to 2011. And maybe, Jacques, you can tell us more about what Hoor mentioned as building the structure for the Biennale and the foundation to overcome the challenges of the edition of 2003, but also to tell us how this developed into, and I would like to stress or to invite you to talk more about the March meeting that was organized launched in 2008, and how this played a role with the connections between the Sharjah Biennial and all the other initiatives in the region and also internationally.
Thank you, Tarek. Thank you, Hoor, and Sharjah Art Foundation for inviting me. Well, maybe to answer the question, I'll start where the point that you've raised with Hoor regarding the center. I mean, creating centers in the Arab world. So I'm in its very essence, I thought right from the beginning, Sharjah could be a center, and there's great potential there. And we were blessed by having Hoor as, you know, the president and the director, so that allowed for things to happen. And so this is one main point. I think my second main concern, coming from a place where there's a lot of initiatives, where you were mentioning the region, there are always initiatives, but the problem of continuity and accumulation is always challenged by resources and means. So I thought that there in Sharjah, those two issues were not issues, were on the contrary, were actually the fuel that charged this kind of progressive thought and the building of the structure. Regarding the building of the structure, I mean, as Hoor said, I had a plan. You know, I mean, there was potential here and there. I had a plan, so I've kind of built this plan gradually, and I kept asking myself certain questions and trying to answer them through kind of designing and defining how these programs could be implemented, and what are the outcomes that we would expect, and how these outcomes can affect society, can affect the target group or groups that Sharjah is aiming at. And you mentioned meetings, for example. We met a lot, and there were several opportunities we met, but they were mainly controlled and driven by institutions in the West. So museums in the West, programs in Europe or the States or what have you. And of course, not to mention what Suha mentioned, the context of the region was so, you know, kind of divided, wars here, intifadas here, impossibility of traveling from one place to another if you have, so to speak, the wrong passport, and you know the whole story. We don't need to get into details of that, but that so the ease of going to Europe or the States was somehow helping us to meet, but also defining what we are speaking about and actually framing what we are doing within the agendas that these institutions who initiate these invitations. So I thought Sharjah could be a place where meetings can happen away from the forces at play within the kind of the Western context. And of course, Sharjah would be a different context and would have its own agenda for sure. But I thought an Arab-driven agenda would eventually create a kind of different language and different ways of communication, and absolutely different outcomes at the end. And that's why I with Hoor, thought of this idea, and I came up with the idea of March meeting, because I thought these need kind of almost like these kind of like the army, you need to march. And it so happened in March, so I thought, oh, okay, it's like marching orders. We need to do marching orders. We need to have everybody in line in Sharjah. And yeah, it was of course there was and there is, I believe there was a lot of leeway for fun, and not only for the sake of fun, but for liberating oneself from the dictates of structures that are imposed upon programs and institutions that are mainly, in our case, financed by the government. So you're in a way yeah, you're serving a government with structure and many people, and that somehow was also another challenge to kind of balance the act and you know, kind of walk the line that somehow allows for as much as possible to happen, but yet not kind of break that line of connection, which is in other contexts, if I may, you know, kind of reflect on contexts like Al Foundation or other institutions, or you mentioned the Palestinian Museum, which I worked for 3.5 years. I mean, you have other people to serve and other funders to, you know, kind of relate to. Sharjah Biennial, when I was invited by Hoor, maybe the biggest opportunity was that it was already liberated. It was already, as Peter has said, it was stripped down to the basics. And that in the context of what was happening around 2004, 2005, when we were working on the Sharjah Biennial, because I wasn't alone. If you remember, there was Tirdad Zergadar and Ken Lam, associate curators. And so they, so the decision was, could this also be an opportunity to help artists, especially from the region, to produce and present their work and have that space for them to really experiment and go beyond the limited means and scope where they work, be it in Palestine or Egypt or anywhere else in the Arab region. Or the flip side of this equation would be to go with the tried and true artists. And maybe I want to say it like, to go with the artists that are who are, you know, kind of well known, and you know, so somehow draw credibility to Sharjah on the international scene, since there was just 2 years ago or a year ago when I took charge, already a big change, a big leap. So this big leap, can it go, you know, push further the limits of experimentation, the limits of what can be done, how it can be done. I don't want to say irrespective of the trends in the world, but I would say thinking more resourcefully, like what would the artists who are part of our, you know, target group, the artists from the region, the institutions from the region, what would they gain if we bring the very famous artists and put them in Sharjah? What would they do? And what would the audience do? You know, why would people travel to Sharjah if they can see the exhibition closer to where they live, be it Europe or be it Asia? So pushing the limit, like Hoor took that, with Peter, took that leap and changed everything. And I pushed that leap a little further and said, okay, let's try the younger, you know, not the well-known. I think that will also not only help these artists, but will also attract people to Sharjah. Because I am the director of XYZ museum sitting in New York or sitting in, you know, Johannesburg, I would definitely be intrigued to fly to Sharjah to see who the artists from, you know, Cairo, or who the artists from whatever, in the region, or in some, you know, kind of budding new ideas that are waiting to be discovered. And that to me was the kind of the second basis I kind of based my thinking. And we kept thinking hard on how can all this work and accomplishment and effort and sleepless nights just disappear after 2 or 3 months when the Biennale is over. You know, what a waste, what, you know, a wasted energy and people. You bring on board many people to work with you, right? And you think of, oh, you're gaining more knowledge, but once they leave, all that experience and knowledge is gone. So we thought, oh, how can we kind of retain a little bit of that and build more and see what are the other needs within within the region and within the whole now international context, because Sharjah by then was actually orbiting on that level. And so other programs were proposed, and like residencies, and very importantly, the production grant, which was, you know, kind of very unique in the region and still is. Not so much. Yeah, I mean, there is AFAQ now, but yeah, at that time there was, yeah. And yeah, it dawned on us that all of this is actually a structure that just needed an umbrella to manage it. So, I mean, just an administrative exercise as how to manage all these kind of different activities and different involvements and different, which led to the creation of the foundation, which I want to, you know, for the record, say in 2005, when we were working on the Sharjah Biennial 7 at the time, we were already speaking about the foundation, and we were already talking, because it was an idea in Hoor's head a long time ago. There was even a location where she wanted to start, you know, kind of basing this idea in. And we thought, maybe the location is not that important. It's just what it does and how it serves and how it operates and who needs to be there. And yeah, and with time, as Hoor said, you know, the arts area became the natural home for it. I'll stop here. Maybe you want to have.
No, I would like maybe to add something to what you said, Jacques.
Please.
I don't think it's only, it is very important that you mentioned that the whole process were designed to serve the artist, of course, and to invite the artist to come and from the region, and of course the visitors can come and see many artists from the region. But not only, I think it's also a proposition that's coming from the region, because either you or maybe all the curators you invited in the following edition, it was a proposition that is coming from the region somehow, which of course that Hoor mentioned in her also statement, the debate somehow, like the exhibition as a debate. And I think it was also one of this what I mentioned in the beginning as what OKWI did in 2002, the proposing the multiple centers of knowledge and artistic productions around the world, and how Sharjah and other, of course, cities in the region became centers for knowledge and for artistic production.
It was, allow me, it was the debate, center and periphery. You know, that the center should not be necessarily the West, but the center could be, you know,
exactly
in the south of the world. And yeah, this is when we had for our 25th anniversary Adriano Pedrosa. It was all about residencies for artists from the south of the world. And it was contemporary, all that was happening in Sharjah was contemporary. And this is why I say the words she said in 2008 are very actual, because this is what happened afterwards and continue to happening.
Yeah. But what I mean, Suha, that the centers are not anymore London and Paris and New York. Sharjah is a center. Tokyo is a center. Beijing is a center, etc.
But the periphery, you know, the south of the world. Huh?
I'm not sure if periphery or multiple centers.
Yeah, and no, it's not. It's the idea that we were considered by the centers as periphery, thus uninteresting, you know. So now the contrary, there is a search for the interesting peripheries. Yes, Peter? No?
And I think it's also the centers are moving somehow. I remember the first time I was invited by Jacques and Hoor to Sharjah, it was the first time I looked at India, I looked at Iran, I looked at Pakistan. You know, it also being in the Gulf gave me a kind of different horizon somehow. But talking about all the connections and Sharjah as the Sharjah connection with different parts in the region. Maybe I would like to go to Peter for the edition of 2003, because of course, as it is an opportunity, it's also a challenge, because I understand that the week of the opening of the 6th edition in 2003, the Iraqi war started. And I'm sure this was a kind of challenging moment somehow. So can you tell us a bit about what happened at that time, and maybe also Hoor can participate in this?
Well, I think Battle of Basra started on March 23rd. I think that was exactly the same time we opened.
Okay.
So it was,
we opened in April. We opened on the day the American troops marched into Iraq.
Okay.
Right.
Even
But
more,
the
yeah.
Basra
Didn't know.
March.
Ah.
Had already gone in now. But I must admit to being a bit confused about the actual dates, because we were so overwhelmed with our own situation, pressed against the ground. We just couldn't believe that something so awful was right next door. And of course, this whole psychology and bombing was the antithesis of all of the living concepts that we had for experientially for the, as Jack, everyone is saying here, we're all agreeing on this sort of aspect of the living experience of art in the region, in the city, in the urban frame, in the streets, etc. And this destruction, this negative possibility on the doorstep was a real shock to the, a traumatic effect, which also affected the increased certain imbalances that we've discussed here briefly about whether certain audiences are prone to just conserve, established identities, whereas this is a completely new identity. I'd like to go back and suggest that there were structures involved in the sixth. There wasn't just a pure chaos. It was a highly negotiated space, because the negotiations were just continual every day. Every day was another negotiation with artists, with the established Biennale, and having to make changes and accommodation for, and then to find a critical level at the same time that depended on the presence of the artists. So the publics and the artists, they were interchanging. So because of the performative aspect was so strong. The war itself, it did provide, it just wasn't a backdrop. It was actually like, it started to become ingrained in the experience of actually being in the spaces. It's something you couldn't get away from. And this had some effects on the way that artists would respond. A couple of them destroyed their work, and there were again, because it was a live-in form of Biennale, then the in situ aspects were very pronounced. There was ways of working and that changed anything that we envisioned. So I think I don't know how to. I think that is something that is not easy to talk about and rationalize in any way at all. I still feel a bit in shock about that, about the coinciding of the war.
Yeah, this actually happened several times in the region, because we are living in a region that changed, with many crises that we have.
Oh, yeah. I think again on this idea of Okw's idea of the idea of a simultaneity of the urban frame in the network, especially in the virtual, like we're in a virtual situation right now. I mean, the immediacy of everything, talking about Palestine as well with Jack there. Yeah. It's not as if we feel detached in any way or safely distant in some of the other parts of the world, like Brussels or London.
Yeah.
So I mean, the proximity and precarity is an issue. I think it was something that the Biennale, the 6th Biennale, was dealing with in some ways, because we were upsetting the general milieu. They were being superimposed. We were superimposing all of the milieu in one meeting place, and the war just accentuated the proximity and precarity of that situation.
Okay,
I think that's
on the
that was
political level, Hoor, was it difficult? Did you get any advice to cancel or to postpone, or how was it?
Yeah, we got told that we should cancel, that we shouldn't open because of the war, and we thought that this is more of a statement of coming together in solidarity, that we should continue and open. It was a very difficult time. There were a lot of artists, of course, mainly American and European artists, who decided they didn't want to fly to the Middle East because we're a war zone. Then you had other artists who were ready to get on a plane and get on the streets and protest against the war in Iraq, which I had to explain to them that
Why?
It doesn't really make sense here, but maybe to exhibit your work and have these discussions and come together. So it was a difficult time, but at the same time, there were a lot of eyes on us from like Western art press as well. So we got a lot of reviews. We got a full page in the New York Times culture section and Art in America, because they couldn't understand, you know, there's a war happening not far away, but then there's a biennial. So it was very kind of very interesting, but very disturbing way of looking at us as well. So we definitely learned a lot.
Yeah. And as we are speaking now, maybe you can tell us a bit about the Sharjah Art Foundation, the establishment of the Sharjah Art Foundation in 2007. Jack mentioned that the idea was there since 2005, and it developed slowly and etc. So can you tell us how did you start the Sharjah Art Foundation? Was it only to extend the activities outside of the Biennale period, or was it having a kind of a different motivation again?
Yeah, I think as Jack mentioned, there are a few things. One of them is that you train people to work, you know, with you for these 2 years, and then suddenly you have to, you know, you have to start again for the next one. Yeah. So the idea of people who are actually a team putting the biennial together, you know, having to have people come and go, starting from scratch, finding, you know, a new person to like design a website, or new person to be a curatorial assistant, or new person to work on production. It didn't make sense not to continue with the same people that you're working with. You know, it really, the foundation grew out of all these people coming together and working together. But it was an investment of kind of training and learning, you know. I have to say myself, I learned from all the people who worked on all the biennials, you know, and continue to do so, and all of you on the panel. Mm-hmm. And another one was audiences, you know, to audience members. We disappear for 2 years and then we appear again, but we're still working, you know. So to try to get the attention of the audience again and work on this public outreach is very exhausting. But if you have a continuous kind of program that keeps people informed and you interact with them, then you create a public, you create, you know, a generation. I'm meeting generations of people who, you know, grew up with Sharjah Biennial 6 being the first biennial that they've seen, or Sharjah Biennial 10, you know. So we start small, you know. Again, we started without the buildings because it was more about the programs that we were doing. And then also the idea of identity, you know, every biennial had its own identity. But what was our identity as a foundation? You still wanted the biennial to be independent in terms of its concept, design, with the curator. But as a foundation, you had to have an entity or an umbrella to bring everything together. Our first residencies came out of Sharjah Biennial 6. Then we had March meetings, we had an exhibition, so there were all these things that were happening, but they weren't the biennial. So how do you put all of this under one organization? And that's what Jack was explaining earlier.
Okay, great. I actually have a question that for everybody about the how do you imagine the future? But at the same time, looking at all the questions coming from the audience, many questions mentioning also the future of contemporary art, either in the UAE or in the world, under the pandemic, under the current circumstances, etc. So maybe we can start to talk about it, but also not only for the current circumstances, but also for the Sharjah Art Foundation and Sharjah Biennial in the future. How do you imagine the future? And either now or a bit later. So maybe we start with Suha.
Okay, we are now recently with what's happening, we are the first country in the world most contaminated. So we do have
Jordan, yeah.
Jordan, yeah. So, but since last April, when the closure, they had very strict governmental instructions, and since it started from the very beginning, last April, we started an online program, very intense, and we called it, the starting point was another world possible, another world is possible, which is the world of the internet. And we continued the whole year, and we're continuing now with our post-colonial ecologies and other programs another year. So the question became, is the virtual the future of art? It looks like until things change and we can circulate and meet and then for the museums, for the biennales, if they can, the problem of transporting artwork, the problem of artist residency, we are continuing with our summer academy with the possibility of online or on-site, if by June there will be opening up and it will be safe. So the question is there. We are, it's, you know, the virtual art, it's the excitement of doing something new. And it's quite exciting, but honestly, we don't know. We don't know. I'm just thinking, can we reinvent ourselves? Can we self-transform, as Foucault said? Can we regain our humanity? Because in addition to all this, and most of the problems through this virtual art, it's the young population, the young students, young people who are really working in the field and discussing of issues that weighs very much and so complicated and so mature in terms, okay, our responsibility, the Anthropocene disaster, the refugees, etc. So their subjects are so intense and reflect the reality of today, which is, by the way, it is something I saw when for the architecture Trinale. When I went to the architecture Trinale twice, in the architectural Trinale, in my opinion, maybe this is a solution, this is a sign of how we could move on. The architecture Trinale in Sharjah, there was issues that concern us all, from the fantastic map of the Aborigines to the, and it was an architecture Trinale, to the plight to the people of Gaza, to the other disasters. So the artist now, if we think of the future, okay, the virtual, let me put it this way, had brought a solution for the time being. But artists nowadays are architect, performance, researchers. There are no more borders anymore in their mind. Yet, you know, in their work, the local is as important as the global. But the concept of biennales or of art exhibition, because of the maturity of these young artists and because of the dramatic problems happening in the world, we're taking a different course. I'm thinking being from the old generation, is it like the period of Marcel Duchamp or the 50s and the 60s in France, when abstraction, a new form of art will come out? Can we root new in the art, a new path for hope? Can we, should we, where would we go? And again, as we started, I always said the artists lead us Darat al Funun. So now the artists led us to this virtual reality. We'll see where, I don't know if you all think of other solutions. Jacques, Hoor, and like Jacques, for instance, the situation, how they live under occupations all the time. Hoor, how do you conceive? But honestly, the Sharjah, the architectural trinale, was for me like a biennale and more. It was a unique. It sets an example of how things should be.
But you were able to go to Sharjah and attend the Biennale and to see the work.
Yeah, twice. This is why I'm saying now I'm not. I can't move and all of you. But we have Zoom. It's fantastic. But the issue now, okay, we do programs virtually for 2 years, but what is the orientation? I say, okay, it will come from the artist, but Hoor, what do you think? How do you foresee?
Okay, let me move the question to maybe we can start with Hoor, because there are some questions to Hoor specifically about this. Noura Al-Kaaba, she said, my question is, how do you see the future of the Sharjah Biennial after the pandemic of COVID-19? So that's one of the questions.
But anybody agreed about what I said about the virtual reality? If we can converse a bit.
Yeah, let us hear what Hoor will say. And
well, for me, it was things opened in Sharjah, I have to say. Things have been open since June, but with social distancing, with restrictions, exhibitions are open. We couldn't do the March meeting in person, unfortunately, so Zoom saved us with that. I'm very much against exhibitions going online and being virtual, because you work so hard to create a public and an audience, and to have them just logging in from their bedrooms can be a little bit depressing, I have to say. I believe in chance encounters, the importance of chance encounters. I was listening to a talk with Gerardo Mosquera yesterday about the Havana Biennial, and someone asked him, how did you meet Gita? And he said, I met Gita in Sharjah. And I think that's the importance of, these places where we meet and then end up doing something together. Many artists have collaborated. So I'm not losing hope that the biennials will continue. Luckily, our spaces are very socially distant and we don't have massive crowds of people at one time. So that's always a great opportunity to look at art in a breathable space. But for us, it was important to postpone by 1 year to give this time for reflection, this time, to think about things, but continue to work with our local audiences. And of course, the question of sustainability comes into mind. A lot of artists are choosing to do works there rather than ship works because of costs of shipping and other crazy costs that are entailed within biennial programming. I can't say what the future will be. It's very much, we'll see what comes, but I think I'm very much hoping that we will continue to be in person together.
Yes, I agree very much. Maybe you can tell us what do you think about the question of the future, Jacques?
Reading a book.
Reading the book during the panel?
Yes. Yeah.
I hope you will give us a quote from the book. So tell us about your how do you imagine the future? There are many questions coming about the future, and either with the current circumstances with the pandemic that I consider temporary. I mean, I'm more optimistic like Hoor, thinking that that's a period of time that will end and then we start to meet again, etc. So how do you reflect on that?
True. I also think that this is only time, you know, few more months, maybe another year, maybe even two. We've seen in history that, you know, these things happen and there are casualties. But then things, you know, life moves on and people just kind of go back to what they were doing before. So I'm not very stuck on this pandemic. I actually thought it was a good opportunity to, you know, reflect on what I was doing, maybe put more effort in what I was doing personally rather than keep thinking about, you know, networks and institutions and other people and stuff like that. And so it was good, and in that sense, and I was able to produce things. And regarding the future, I'm very interested in, you know, the whole idea of the democratization of the art market. I mean, that's something that bugs me quite a bit. And I see how all this effort is eventually usurped by the art market and those gatekeepers, and how artists are, you know, at the disadvantage most of the time. There are few who are, you know, kind of savvy players and manage to kind of position themselves vis-a-vis making a living out of their work, but the multitudes are of artists are basically struggling. And so that is something that is, you know, kind of preoccupying my mind quite a bit. I'm trying to think through ideas, and I hear Suha's point regarding, you know, kind of the digital world. And I just read this piece of news this morning on the New York Times regarding the NFTs and how one piece that went in auction was in Christie's. I think I can go back to the article. That the bid started at $100, and it's an NFT. So for, I don't know, those who know, it's a digital art piece. It's not a real art piece. It's a digital art piece, but of course secured. It's what do you call it? Its authenticity and what's the word? Now misses me the word. Is encrypted in these blockchains. So when you buy it, so it went in the last auction of yesterday or day before yesterday for $100, and it sold for $65 million.
Oh,
yeah. So that was like really shocking to the world, you know. And it's shocking to the art market because this is going directly from the artist to the buyer. Of course, Christie is in between, but eventually, if we're dealing with art as we're dealing with other merchandise, especially especially commodities that are not actually physically traded. I mean, it's only the number, like when you're trading with gold or silver or something, you're not actually moving gold around. You're basically trading with the value. So if the thinking goes in that direction, I think there could be a way where artists can take some control of the market, and their connection with the buyers or the consumers can be more direct and uninterrupted by all these people in between.
Okay,
so that's where my thinking is going, and that's what I think should be done. I mean, I don't know what will happen in the future, but if you'll ask me what I am going to do about it, this is what I'm going to do about it.
Okay, very good.
Tarek, I don't want them to misunderstand. I didn't say one thing. I didn't say that the virtual is the virtual art is the future. I'm saying now we are living in a situation where the virtual art that was brought to us by the young youth has solved the problem of lack of communication and exchange and travel. Of course, it's very important to be able to touch. One of the first things we put at Darat al Funun is the books. You know, people now are digital, but we care about the books, we care about the people to get to know each other, etc. What I'm saying in the virtual is this: where do we go? I said, can we reinvent ourselves? And the artists lead us, because what's happening, the COVID, it will go, but it's a big tragedy. For you, for me, we are sitting in our houses, we have time to reflect, but the condition of the people, the tragedies that you hear, the people who are dying in the hospitals, it's a tragedy that is moving the whole, the whole youth, the whole artists. All the stories of like the Rawinja, the artists became deeply involved, the youth, in politics and what's happening all over the world. So how, after this period of closure, how will the quality of the art, not where the art is done and if it is done in museums or not, is this going to create, it's a questioning. I don't have solutions. It's we are all in agony for what's happening. So where will it lead us? Let's hope for a better road.
And Peter, maybe you can tell us, how does it work with the teaching?
Yeah, I was going to say that probably the core of this question is in the educational remit, especially of young people have a tremendous anxiety that we underestimate. And when we teach them, we're using Zoom, I can feel it. I mean, it's a funny thing about the virtual screen is in some ways it intensifies one's feelings, which would include also understanding the other's alienation. So when I teach in groups of 40 students and they're very reluctant to say anything, it's because there's a kind of rather attenuated kind of anxiety permeating the event. So I think that's an issue of some degree of intensifying the alienation effect, which is becoming quite problematic particularly in this period. And if we are optimistic, because there's this terrible feeling that the potential is turning to pessimism. So I don't want to go down that road, just in a kind of pseudo-scientific analysis of the neurology of that, or the neurological effects of the virtual, which is as good as it's bad. I mean, it's the pharmacon, as Derrida calls it, isn't it? It's a pharmacon. It's a poison and antidote. How do we use it as for good? I mean, how do we use it for good? I mean, then that could be that artists are the leaders in, the artists are the ones to lead those new imaginaries. Because the virtual is only another word for the imaginary, the capacity of a human being to imagine something, and the electronic substitution of the imagination. That's a problem of techniques, that philosophers do talk about, the problem of technology swallowing up the enframing the human and then collapsing the frame. So I think a lot of the new work in ecologies and perhaps a rebirth of Marxist, or looking at restructuring Marxist ideology in real terms of the global. That's probably the future. But how do you? I wouldn't know. How one initiates the motivation. I used that word earlier. The motivation of young people, and I would hope that there is a kind of self-determination in young people. I mean, I think that's possibly what we're talking about here. I mean, Jack mentioned it last time we were talking, that there are ways of teaching perhaps beyond the curriculum. And I would agree with him, is that we have to open up the agenda of the education to knowing exactly how young people are orienting themselves in consciousness. What is the consciousness today of the youth? I think that's where I would probably answer your question.
Sorry. Thank you, Peter. And maybe, was it difficult to organize the spring exhibitions now in Sharjah under the current circumstances that people cannot travel, etc., or was it fine?
I think when I have to say we have a very big team at Sharjah Art Foundation who are very used to installing exhibitions, and we took all the necessary requirements. We have a ticketing, you have to book tickets to visit the exhibitions. That way we can control the number of people in each exhibition space. We've extended 2 of our exhibitions to stay longer, so people have more time to visit them. And the 2 new exhibitions that just opened today are also on view. So I don't think it's been challenging. I think we were very lucky in the UAE that there was some clarity on how we could continue to work and what to do and what not to do. And a lot of people were following the rules. So hopefully that we can continue in that way.
Okay, great. I think now we can start to take some of the questions that came to us. So the first question coming from Huda Abi Faris, and she says, what you say that the 2003 edition of the Sharjah Biennial was a catalyst that launched a serious contemporary art scene in the UAE? That's a question. And then the second part of the question related to the pandemic, and how do you imagine the next edition to respond to the new regional art scene post-pandemic and tragedies in the region and the world? So who wants to answer this question? Maybe Hoor, you can answer the first part.
Sure. Which was again?
It was,
2003.
Would you say that the 2003 edition of Sharjah Biennial was the catalyst that launched a serious contemporary art scene in the UAE?
Well, I think there was a serious art scene. It was a very small art scene. And then that was also always part of the biennial. And that's what I grew up with. That's why I was interested in art. That's why I became an artist, because there was a scene there. It wasn't as maybe global or international in its kind of presence within the biennial. Sharjah Biennial was known regionally, very much so. It was mentioned in the previous panel discussing the history of Sharjah Biennial, like Ibrahim Salahi getting awarded an honor, Salwa Rawda Shker. There were so many important people and artists and thinkers who were part of the history of Sharjah Biennial. So I think it created something different, but not necessarily that it was, there was nothing there. There was a lot there. It was building up on what was existing there since the 1980s and earlier.
Yeah, which of course also was reflected in your the UAE pavilion when you curated in 2015, right? Where you presented the exhibitions that were taking place in the UAE from the 80s till now, right?
Yeah, the reason I did that exhibition as well is because, to have a pavilion like the UAE in Venice, what are people's perception of what the art scene in the UAE is like? And a lot of the things that I was seeing was that you should just do one work that would be, contemporary, something that would get people to visit, and then they spend 5-10 minutes in the space and then they leave. And I said, but for me, that wasn't important. It was important to really look back at what is the history of the art scene in the UAE. So it was a shock to some people that I decided to curate almost like a museum exhibition in Venice, which is totally not what the Venice Biennial was about. But I thought it was important to look back at the history of the Emirates Fine Art Society and look at the artists who really were setting the scene for what the UAE art scene is, and created that book from archival material.
And can I would like to allow myself to answer Huda a bit, because I think there was a scene, of course, contemporary art scene. It was also mentioned in the previous panel when Hassan Sharif and several artists went to the market and started to show their work in the market. So there are many initiatives and also exhibitions, etc. But I think Huda's question may be highlighting the fact that the Sharjah Biennial in the new format offered a kind of platform that connect these initiatives and artwork and the contemporary art work in the UAE with others in the region and internationally within a conceptual framework, either in the following, of course, editions, not only 2003, but starting from 2003 and going on till now. So, and the other part of the question, Hoor, and this, I think you also have to answer this, if you think the next edition will respond to the new regional art scene post-pandemic and tragedies. I think maybe Huda is referring to the Lebanese situation and in the region and the world.
Well, I have to state for the upcoming Sharjah Biennial, it was very much conceived by Okwi and Bazaar. So it was looking at Okwi's research on the post-colonial constellation, and the title of the upcoming biennial is Thinking Historically in the Present. So there was a lot of work already started with that, and we're continuing to conceive that project. It would look at the post-colonial discourse, and there will be new commissions by artists also looking at the history and post-colonial keywords that Okwi set in place. It would definitely relate to, and does relate to, everything that's been happening recently, from Black Lives Matters to other situations that have been happening in the last couple of years. So it is really much about the present, but thinking historically and how we can reflect on the history of that.
Next question from Marie Nisar. Maybe this Suha can answer. What makes the Sharjah Biennial different from other biennials around the world?
Oh my God, what a big question. No, it is, you have to, excuse me? First of all, you have to think and consider that whether Sharjah Biennale or what is done in Lebanon or in Jordan or in Palestine, we are in a conflict zone. So but we do not know what will happen tomorrow. This is one. So example, 2003, you had the same date, it was the opening of the war of Iraq. Okay. Secondly, the Sharjah Biennale now is introducing artists, curating, take risk with young artists. This is one I mentioned about the artists that she promoted from Jordan, going to the far places where nobody goes. The problem with the Biennales now in the world, except what I have seen, Koshi Biennale, it was led by artists. And then, but the Biennale, whether Venice, etc., it's always the same names, the same, what Jacques was saying, should we get people, artists known, so we attract the attention or what, so it's, Sharjah Biennale takes risk, moves in, is not afraid to move into regions that are remote and then keep on innovating and gives commission artists, gives them residency, support them really. Not that you bring our artists to commission for this show and that's it. So in this sense, it's an initiative that is really needed. And that has produced fantastic results, I think, different from so many biennale who keep on repeating the same thing worldwide. I'm saying it with confidence.
Peter, do you want to add something about to answer to this question? What makes the Sharjah Biennial different from other biennales around the world?
Well, I haven't visited that many biennales around the world. I've been Venice, of course, and Havana stand out. Lahore, yeah, I mean, the Guangzhou, and I know that in each case there's a sincerity of preoccupation to Istanbul as well, to use the whole framework of the urban and the local regional, which is a kind of generic ethics of practice. But I think that Sharjah is particularly active and motivated. And I think that it has other functions as well. In some ways, of course, as you say, talking about conflict zones and the particularity of where it is a center of gravity. It says become a sort of center of gravity, which has redrawn the map, perhaps more than the other biennales. And that gives it some sense of place, I think, that is remarkable. And yeah, I'm again confident, as Suha is, of being able to express that confidence about the work that Hoor has done, and Jack and everybody involved in the Sharjah Foundation, which is a remarkable architecture in itself, actually. So that also gives it a kind of, I go back to what I originally thought was, by giving the sense of space and structure to artists, then the artists themselves can feel the freedom of the potential of their work, and how the public can meet in such a space. There's a lot of elegance, I use that word, about that, about how that is operating today. Yeah, and self-sustaining in that sense.
I would invite also the audience, if they want to tell us what makes the Sharjah Biennial different than the other biennales in the world, from point of view of other artists or curators or people who are close or even audience for the Sharjah Biennial or the Sharjah Art Foundation activities. Jack, I will take you from your book for a second. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a question specifically for you.
I'm listening. I don't have to watch you all the time.
She's gonna say, why is the location not important that Jack mentioned? I think in your intervention, you said something about the location is not important, and maybe you have to clarify, because I think Zarina took it as a wherever we put the biennial, it will be the same or something. This is what I understand from the question. But the question literally say, why is the location not important? Jack mentions.
Yeah, there's a misunderstanding here.
I
wasn't talking about the biennial. I was talking about the foundation, because I mentioned the idea that the foundation was already in Hoor's head and had the location. So, but we decided that it's not about the location. To build the foundation, you need the program, you need the people, you need the, everything else, all the infrastructure. And the infrastructure is a building process that takes time. And that's why we thought, yeah, this is gonna be built stone by stone. And that's why it took some time. So even though I was with Hoor from 2004, 2009 was the moment to announce the foundation, and not before that, until everything, kind of came together and made sense. And I was just saying that original location that Hoor wanted became not insignificant, but somehow irrelevant in the context of the biennial being situated in the arts area, in the middle of the old town. And that's why that location became, yeah. So it's not, I was just trying to kind of make the difference between, you know, once you decide on doing something, and maybe Suha mentioned that you build these big, huge monster or whatever spaces and equip them, and then you start thinking, okay, what am I going to do with them? How am I going to fill them up? The biennial's location is paramount for what happens in the biennial. It's absolutely a work in progress, site-specific project that starts and takes place over a period of 2 years. Part of its public engagement is the 2-3 months that it opens, but it's a whole process. And that's why projects like the programs like the production program was actually born out of the biennial, because we sensed the need for it. But again, we didn't want it that the biennial becomes overburdened by all these other ways of helping and ways of building an art scene in Sharjah, in the UAE, but also for the whole region and beyond. So that's why we started creating these programs like the March meeting, like the production, like the residencies, like collaborations with other institutions in other parts of the world. In Egypt, I remember there was a first collaboration for an exhibition there. And yeah, and eventually the foundation just kind of, sat there, and it made itself present without us even, designing it. And we just needed to kind of find a nice logo.
Mentioning the foundation, there is a question to, I think this time maybe to Hoor, from Dennis Osbilin. I'm sorry if I'm announcing the name wrongly. Is the foundation today what you envisioned it to be when you first started? I think it's also for Hoor and Jack.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've grown a lot, but as I said, we've grown really from relationships and friendships with people. I mentioned this the other day, it's a very small community in a way, and we continue working with people again and again, like continuing working with Darat Adwi, whose solo exhibition is on at the moment, but all the projects that happened throughout the years working with Tarek, it's been very organic in terms of residencies, in terms of younger artists who Tarek worked with, who went on to do their own thing, but also in training our technicians to work on things as well. So these continued relationships really helped us grow in a way more than I would have imagined, I have to say. I don't think I have had a preconceived set idea of what the biennial or the foundation or the art scene, in the region would be. I think it's just grown really very, very slowly, but also as a group effort and a regional effort, I have to say, taking into consideration every curator who's worked on every edition has really had an important role in the history of the foundation and the biennial.
And there's another question, Hoor, I think it's also good that you answered, from Reem El Fadl, who's asking what would be the best way Sharjah Biennial defines the criteria of the biennial. I'm not 100% sure what Reem means. Maybe she means the criteria of selecting the artist or criteria of selecting the curator. If Reem is listening, maybe she can elaborate her questions precisely, but maybe you can start to tell us.
We've had many talks with the International Biennial Association. We've been having meetings. It's a convening of various biennials around the world coming together to discuss various issues, concerns. This conversation ends up, it keeps coming up. There are biennials that are set in their way. There are other biennials that are more flexible in their models. So I don't quite understand the question that she's coming from. I don't think there's a set way, but I believe that as Okui also put it and mentioned it, that the biennial is this model where it's a space to kind of evolve and have these conversations, that it's ever changing. It's not set in stone in a way.
Okay, I invite Reem to elaborate on her question a bit about the criteria. What does she mean exactly about the criteria? There is another question that is addressed to Hoor, but I think we can also open it for the other participants to answer. From Maria Veronica, and she says the universal shock of the pandemic has placed us all in undeniable duty to change radically our way to live and work. How this traumatic time affected your projects as a curator? What are your outcomes, and how it is reflected in the new biennial working process?
Shall I answer that?
Yes, I think you can start, and then, because also it's about curatorial practice, maybe also Peter can contribute, and Jack, etc.
I think for me, I was very ready to postpone everything. It gives us more time to breathe, more time to think, like Jack said, more time to reflect, on various things, and also time for us as an institution to catch up. We had so much work to do that we weren't finding the time to finish anything as soon as we wanted to. Many publications, many projects. There was this idea of also extending our exhibitions to give people more time to come and visit the exhibition, since it's ticketed and you can't have too many people in the same space. So I think allowing more time was really important for us. I have to say we are busier than usual during the pandemic, because you're on back-to-back Zooms, and it's there. I think everybody assumes that you're at home, so you have time, so you're constantly working night and day. So it's been quite busy but productive at the same time.
Maybe I can also answer Maria. For me personally, as a curator, I was invited. I have been working in China for some years now, in doing different exhibitions, and I was invited to do an exhibition from far away. And actually, I cannot. I think I cannot. So it's if it's the question about the how the pandemic is affecting the work of a curator. It is. I think I need to be in the place. I need to work with the artists. I need to work with the technicians. That I think is still very, very important for me. There is a question that I think Suha can start to answer, and also Jack as the director of Ma'amal Foundation, and also Hoor. From Rahul, what responsibilities do institutions, foundations, biennales, art workers, artists have in protecting from the appropriation of socio-political concerns into contemporary arts and its makers? What possible alternatives can these structured system and individuals generate?
At the end of the question, Tarek.
What possible alternatives can these structures, you mean
before that,
institutions, biennials, art workers, artists, how these structures and systems and individuals generate possible alternatives?
But I don't understand the question.
I think it's I think the role of the institutions and the foundations to protect, I think, the artists from the appropriation of socio-political concerns that comes into contemporary art and its makers.
Why? What does he mean by association of contemporary?
Related to the situation now that the artists, they don't have the same system that used to function of biennales and exhibitions or market or the art market because of the pandemic. So what is the role of the
no, the artists who are continue to produce virtual work are paid for production. There is a production thing. So in terms of financial security, there is more or less. I'm not talking about the big museums who furloughed so many of their employees. What is in the question, in my opinion, should be not the institutions. What will they do for the artists? No, it's what all of us, institution, artists, what will we do? We ask, everybody's asking the question, how this COVID came. This world that man created, this Anthropocene, this post-colonial ecology, all this questioning that the artists and the institutions are thinking and debating. It's true, this has been a period of thinking for some of us who can afford and work at the same time. But the responsibility, our responsibility, and how can we operate change, at least within our circles, but from the smallest thing. I think it's a big tragedy for the whole humanity, not only institution responsible. We don't go back to the idea that as an institution takes care of this or that. It's them themselves should claim things, demand things, and this is what they are doing.
Of course, but for example, here for example, in Belgium here, where many of the institutions that used to invite artists, they still had their own budget and they still supported the artists despite the fact that the artists didn't come to perform or to exhibit. So it's a kind of the responsibility during these times. I think that was the question was about, which is not always, I have to say, easy or easy to find a system to do it. Peter, do you want to add something for this question? Should we move?
Yeah, again, the question is a complex one. I didn't really understand. I said I understood that Suha said about the term "from the smallest." I like this idea of the small. I like the idea that perhaps the real issue of non-profitability, Jack talked about the democratization of the market is possibly central to this answer, that ways of dissociating self-interest and moving away from the paranoid critical kind of way of reading art to a much more reparative way of reading. And that I noticed that the Berlin Biennale itself is moving into ideas of repair. Something I've been interested in myself is for many decades is art as a form of repair and in terms of the world. So I mean, institutions have to somehow find ways of self-repair, and I don't know how. I mean, I'm not curating in that kind of way. So, but I do use virtual systems all the time. So I think that's a complete overhaul by the look of it. I mean, that's the responsibility of the artist. Of course, generally has been given the credentials of being allowed to be irresponsible. I mean, then again, in terms of the ethical dimensions, I think we have to really rethink this whole idea of health. It becomes really a central, an immediate concern. I mean, in every respect, from what everyone is saying today, I think that's coming across, the immediacy of that concern. I can't answer it in any other way, I don't think.
We have 2 more questions and we have 6 minutes to go. So the first question is from Haneen Muhammad, asking, other than the Biennale, what do you do to engage with the local audience? Maybe Hoor can answer this question.
Sure. I mean, we have a huge program of workshops that we do. We've set up art institutes in every town in the Emirate of Sharjah, so not just in the arts area, on the East Coast, in the central region. We have exhibitions, year-round exhibitions, the March meeting every year, so not only on the biennial year. We have the residencies, we have, as Jack mentioned, the production program grant. We have an artist book fair as well, many talks and conferences. We collaborate also with the Africa Institute on various programs. We have the Sharjah Film Platform, so we have the open air cinema with open film screenings, and everything is free and open to the local community and public. So I think there's a lot that happens.
Yeah, there is a lot. And then the other question from Surfal Habibi, and I think I would like to answer this question. How can we rethink the center? How can we continuously decenter the center? And I think he's reflecting on the discussion or the what we said about the Documenta 2002 as proposing the several centers around the world for contemporary art where knowledge building. So I think, Surfal, I think it's not the center, and it was never, I mean, since I think, I don't know exactly the dates, maybe I would say that maybe since 2000 or even earlier, there will be no one center, but many centers. And I think we have to continue to do what we do to keep the centers that are related to us, or the centers that were in which we engage with each other and with the others alive and continue. I think so. If somebody, Hoor, if you want to add, Jack, about the centers and the different centers. Again, the question is, how can we rethink the center? Question mark. How can we continuously decenter the center?
I think it's it's a bit difficult this time, and has been extremely, kind of surprisingly difficult, where the actual existence of certain structures and institutions is at question now. I don't know if we can continue, because in contrast with other institutions, we're dependent mainly on foreign aid. And it's not only the pandemic that has somehow put a halt to a lot of plans and programs, but it's also a huge shift in those priorities vis-a-vis the funders. And the pressure is now either to accommodate the new interests and the new ideas and the new whatever challenges that the funders want to support, and how this particular institution or that particular can align itself with these new goals and new whatever programs, and eventually secure the basic, kind of costs of just surviving and paying salaries and having the place open. Not to mention, of course, programming and inviting artists and spending on production and all of that. So that's on one hand of the spectrum. And on the other hand, there is a sort of shrinkage in the support that is coming to art institutions, and not only because of the pandemic, but also because of, again, and something that is across the whole world, at least the people that I know who are engaged in financing and funding institutions. And there is some kind of decrease, a very significant decrease in the amount of funding that is available. And that's another huge challenge where you're basically asked to let go of those, people who you trained and worked with and built, the institution with, and you need to, kind of send them away. And luckily for us, for example, as an example, we actually survived this past year because of the pandemic, not in spite of the pandemic, because of the pandemic, because the Israeli government, and since we're living under the Israeli occupation, have paid us unemployment. So that's why we could basically earn a living the whole past year. If there wasn't a pandemic, I can almost be sure to kind of tell you that, Al-Ma'mal could have been closed.
Oh, wow.
They give you, sorry,
Yeah.
Jacques, they give you pension and they do not give the vaccine to the population?
We are also given vaccine. We are living in Jerusalem. We are living in Israeli territory proper. We are not living in the West Bank. So
Really?
we're subject to Israeli,
It's, I think the time.
Has come.
Hour.
The right
No
time.
way. That was too short.
Right time.
Yeah, it was 2 hours, and but thank you very much for your participation, and thank you for the also answering the questions. And I would like to remind the people that the audiences that they can register to attend the sessions tomorrow, but they can also watch a movie tonight. They can look at the Sharjah Art Foundation website and the program of the March meeting, where in addition to the debates and discussions, we have also some activities, film screenings, and some performances. So thank you very much. Thank you, Hoor, Jack, Peter, and Suha. I hope I was a good moderator. And
Number one.
and thanks for the audience who attended the session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.